A note of warning. This podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime Daily, the podcast, bringing you high-profile and under-the-radar cases from across the country for the week of September 4th, 2019. I'm Billy Jensen, and this is Owen Michael.
Hello.
And our guest today is Eric Rosoff. Eric, you're a retired Burbank police lieutenant with 31 years in law enforcement experience, and you started two training and consulting organizations. You started the Career Survival Group, which is an harassment prevention training organization for fire departments across the country, and the Campus Safety Group, which is focused on emergency response plans for K through 12 and college level, including natural disasters, as well as human threats, which we're seeing all too often these days. Welcome, Eric. Eric, what have you been working on these days?
Thank you very much for having me. It's been pleasantly busy. I am blessed that after a wonderful career in law enforcement, I still kind of get to keep my my hand in the mix and work with professionals, both my friends in fire service and my passion really is campus safety. And through both of my consultation groups, I get to travel, meet with folks, and share some experience and expertise I have related to both of those issues.
Mm-hmm. So as the school year gets started, you know, all the kids are back to school now. What's on your mind right now in terms of school safety issues?
I really, I've got a 15-year-old daughter, and I send her to school every day, confident that my educators are doing the best that they possibly can to provide for the safety, but also aware of what's going through her mind and their minds and such. And truly, as an expert in campus safety, what I'm most focused on, I think, is trying to enlist parents and students at an appropriate age to understand just some of the basics. And the reason I focus on the parents and students is the fact remains that there are systems, safety systems in education that are designed to provide for the safety of students, staff, visitors on campus. And for many reasons, not the least of which being, an incredibly tight budget, those systems aren't audited as frequently as they should be, and frequently when you do an after-action report to a threshold type event on a campus, we find out that equipment wasn't in place, supplies, there was no training that was supposed to go along, and the system failed, and we could have seen before the incident that the system was going to fail. My interest in reaching out to parents and students is there's no politics in that. That if I can get parents involved and students involved to look behind the curtain and ask knowledgeable questions, we will see that some of these things are broken, and there might be more of a motivation for the school district, the politicians that are involved to step up and fix things that are broken.
From the ground up.
From the grassroots efforts, right. Absolutely. Right.
And what would you tell somebody, just what are the three biggest things that you should do as a student if something happens to start on your campus like that?
If at the time of the event is typically what we refer to, there's the run, hide, fight. There's many types of. I'd be aware of what situational awareness is key, and cell phones, and there are many distractions. There's always been many distractions to a student on campus, but now that we seem to be even more distracted. So the three biggest things I would say: number one, please take the time to be aware of where you're at any given place that you might be on a campus, where you are, and where your potential exits might be. Mm-hmm. And if something starts to develop, as simple as, we hear this, see something, say something, but if something starts to develop, distance yourself from whatever that is as quickly as you possibly can. That situational awareness also would cover into be aware of your entire campus, not just the one door that you always come in and out of, as you're going into a building or into a classroom, but are there alternatives even up to windows and such? Because I don't want them to have to formulate a plan in the middle of an event.
That's right.
But we also don't want to plan so much that we paralyze them, that it's just and I'll take this beyond school. You go into the theater, look around what's going on, and where you can get in, get out.
Yeah, especially, when you talk about fires, that was the biggest thing, the thing that happened at the Great White Show is that, and this happens a lot with fires, is that you go in, once a fire starts, the door that you went through is the door that you're going to want to go out.
So was that Rhode Island, early 2000s,
yes,
I think is where it happened?
Yeah.
And it was an overcrowded club. And
overcrowded club, they did pyro, and then...
Plus things are confusing and the lights are off and, you maybe have smoke.
But you know that's in sort of natural reaction. I came from there.
Right. Sure.
This is where I'm going to go out. But we also know that, at least in America, there's going to be fire exits, wherever you are.
So we were just discussing off air about what happened at Parkland in Florida and with Marjorie Stoneman and how that sort of. We're also talking about tunnel vision and things like that, and adrenaline going, all those kinds of things. But this one in particular, can you tell us a little bit about what we were just saying? I'm going to go back to just school districts.
Sure. There are already safety policies, programs, and processes in place because we can anticipate what some of the more dangerous things might be during any given day. Mm-hmm. And as a result of researching those events, we try to design the best policies to overcome them. And in those policies, we have two distinct things that we're trying to accomplish. The first is, can we prevent it? That's the best hope of any policy we have, but we know that we can't prevent something like an earthquake. Mm-hmm. So then the second part of our policy and what we really work on is the idea about, can we avoid the otherwise avoidable injuries or maybe even death? And Stoneman Douglas is part of that regardless of what might not have happened before this event took place, I've read the articles about various law enforcement agencies that have been alerted to that this troubled young man was out there. But as soon as he arrived at the school, something bad was going to happen. And there were systems in place that shouldn't have been as bad as it was. I think you may have heard that there was one of the alarms went off, a fire alarm went off, and students came out as a result of the fire alarm, and that exposed them to extreme danger. However, a series of events before that, there should have been a lockdown that went before the fire alarm ever was set off, and then the students and the teachers in those rooms would have had a protocol that says, don't come out into the hallway just yet. Mm-hmm. Let's wait to see what this, if we put you on a lockdown, now there's a thing to come outside, everybody just stay right where you're at. It's those types of, I won't even say it's nuance, I'd say it's principle-based, make sure that we're doing the safety things that we're supposed to be doing anyway, and make sure that we're doing them well. That's our baseline. And again, it goes back to, could we have prevented it? Maybe. Could we absolutely have eliminated some of the death and injury? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And that's the responsibility, I think, at this point of students and parents.
You think it's getting better?
Not necessarily, because as I think there is more awareness, and the courage and the persistence of the students, that are rallying. However, we're running up. There's a political bureaucracy at any level. When I first became a police officer, I thought I was going to save the world. And then I got a few years on the job, and I thought, well, maybe I can save California, And then I came down to, if I could have a good shift tonight and protect the town, I'm doing pretty well. Mm-hmm. So what I recommend to anybody that I'm dealing with at a specific district, don't get caught up in all the noise that's going on and the debate and the 24-hour news cycle. What are we supposed to be doing right now? Yeah. And use our resources to do the best that we can do to make sure that we are in compliance with all our safety practices anyway. I hope that answered the question.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, we've gone so far from, when you were duck and cover, that was it, right?
Right.
It's all it was duck and cover.
I grew up in Illinois, so it was tornado drills,
right?
Which you went out into the hall, or you went in the hallway, kind of talked and worried about glass flying and things like that. Now we've got a hurricane coming up the East Coast right now, I'm sure, right. But those schools that's enough advance warning that they can get out of the way. Yeah. It's not an immediate type of thing.
And here's what happens is, when you're asking if it gets better, part of it that gets better is we learn the lessons from a tragedy like Stoneman Douglas. We don't learn maybe the greater lesson, at the global level, but we do learn some of the lessons at the boots on the ground response level. However, the unfortunate reality is the profile of someone that might engage in a threshold event, they're learning the response lessons as well.
So that brings me to a thought I have about infrastructure, and we're seeing things in the news right now about how they're redesigning hallways and classrooms and even entirely new schools. But you've also got the majority of schools are last century or earlier in some cases. So there's that, and some of the designs that I've seen don't immediately, they're building hiding places and rounded hallways and mirrors and things like that, which obviously they've got some intent behind there, and they've got some research that goes along with that. It's also, though, if that student, and it's usually a student who is doing the shooting, has attended the school, knows where all the hiding places are, knows all the protocols and things like that. That's what I worry about, is that 99% of everybody's learning the right thing, but that one kid, which then goes to a situational awareness and background reporting and things like that.
I would tell you that I believe that there are layers of folks that really think we're doing the best that we have in front of us based on the information we have to make a design that would facilitate safety. And we should continue to do that. Unfortunately, there's a layer of predatory vendor because there's very little money. And if I can convince you that my gadget will make us more safe or my construction will make you more safe, it kind of becomes I always go back to the difference between feeling safe and being safe. There are many things that we do related to construction or the widget that somebody is selling, and we feel safe. What I would say is if we engage in a process of safety, what are our danger factors? What do we have available? What are we supposed to be doing? What have we learned? And you engage in that process, you'll identify some gaps. Yeah. And at the end of that process, if you find one of those widgets would help you, by all means, go get it. Yeah, but you don't start with the widget.
You don't start with the widget. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And you start with everything, and then you see, all right, what are the gaps, and then go with the widgets. As far as the widgets go, we've seen a lot of these ideas. And you're right there. You're seeing some predatory vendors. And I'm not calling these people out in particular, but you've got redesigning the entire high school. Then you've got the door thing with the how to lock the door, and then putting the belt around the all that kind of stuff. Then some people have gone through, and not necessarily even widgets that they're trying to sell, the box of rocks, the bucket of rocks, or the
the attack dog.
The attack dog.
We saw this. I saw this on Twitter, and it kind of made the rounds a little bit in the news. Somebody training a dog to go and attack to find the shooter and attack it. The dog doesn't know what's going on other than to eliminate the shooter. But the widget stuff, we're human people. We throw money at stuff right after. In the event of a tragedy, you think we need to spend money on stuff and do it up that way, which is an understandable thing, but it's not always a thing. But some of these other ideas, is there anything? Do you have an opinion on some of on one over the other, or in general, try everything, see what works?
My thing is try nothing and see how it's working for other folks, because we don't. Our idea for sending our children to school is I want her to receive a first-rate education. I want her to feel safe while she's there. And I don't know that the jury is back on any of the recent design things. And at what I've read, I haven't been 100% impressed on the credentials of the folks and the background of. I think this is a little bit of, oh, look, I was a police officer for this many years. This is what we should be doing. And you'll hear that, right? You'll hear, if you go to your local school district and say, what are you doing about safety? One of the first two things the first thing they'll say is, safety is the number one priority to us at this district, always. Mm-hmm. And they mean it. Yeah. The second thing they'll say is, we're working closely with local law enforcement. I am local law enforcement. I'm not sure what that means. Because the first responder to something that happens at a school is my child and her teacher. And cops are coming, and cops are going to do the best they can. But remember, the difference in that is the teacher that's there, the staff, their whole job that's referred to as in local parentis, they're acting in my stead. Mm-hmm. They're going to that's their mission, protect my child. The cop's mission for responding is to find whatever the problem is that's causing danger to my child. Mm-hmm. There's a double, and and we should recognize, not that, listen, I appreciate the Burbank Police Department, and I know they're going to be their lickety split if something happens on my kid's campus. I'm worried about the couple minutes before that happens. Yeah. That's what I'm focused on. So I can't really speak to, is anything working? I'm not, with the money that I know our district doesn't have, I would not at this moment support them saying we're going to spend, millions of dollars in some sort of reconfiguration that I can't show really is the end of some type of knowledgeable process.
What comes to mind when I think about that kind of stuff is almost like you want to hire, which seems counterintuitive to me and not the way to go, but if you want that kind of experience, you want somebody a construction company that's done stuff in the green zone in Baghdad and hardened embassies and things like that, which is the worst thing I can think of having an open campus.
You put your nail on that. There's a company that's out there that's what it is that they're saying is this is who we design for. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, you know what? People get killed in prison, and prisons are built relatively, that it's a
Yeah.
If I can give you one quick example, California has a law that requires every campus to have a comprehensive safe school plan. I'm an expert in that law. I train to it on behalf of the LA County Office of Education. Many districts come. One of the districts, a more affluent district, just the last time I did this training, the guy came in and says, I know there's some updates and stuff, but we've got all this safety stuff taken care of because we've hired a group of Navy SEALs, and they're coming in to do all this for us. Right on, that's great. Then we did the training about what the law says, and he comes up and says, we're not doing any of those things. And I said, well, how are the SEALs working out for you right now? And not to take any, God bless the Navy SEALs, but the Navy SEAL has a different mission than the Burbank Unified School District.
Right.
And it's when I first got involved in this law, what had happened was there was, I was in the early 90s, and I happened to be a gang investigator at the time with a background working on campuses as a school resource officer. Mm-hmm. So I was nominated and selected to work on a cadre between the State of California Department of Education and Department of Justice, 25 educators, 25 cops. And the idea was we as police, we have some ideas about safety, but you have to be in the room as educators because your mission is different than ours.
Yeah.
And that's how the law was produced. It has to be that partnership. One isn't more important than the other.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, with another thing that I've seen is training teachers how to deal with, gaping gunshot wounds or other things like that, which I can see that as far as the natural progression of what kids are possibly going to run into on their campus, which is an unfortunate state of affairs. But then about arming teachers and things like that. My dad's a retired school teacher. As you say, the mission is so different. Yeah. I know a lot of teachers too. I don't know any teachers that would be particularly interested in that. I'm also from Illinois and I live in California, so that's demographically selective there. It could be different in other parts of the country, but I think most teachers are not excited about that. Comments, please weigh in. But there doesn't seem to be
I'll run afoul of some of my law enforcement friends, but I'm going to say that I don't believe adding more guns to the situation is going to help that situation. Also, my mom, God bless her, and rest her soul, was a teacher for 30 years. Mm-hmm. I'm not putting a gun in June Rosoff's hands. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I can't see that that's going to make anything better at the end of the day. She was a beloved teacher in Burbank Unified. I think that we do the best we can with what we have in front of us. We stay optimistic about our kids are going to school and they're receiving a fantastic education. We understand the angst at every level now of delivering our kids to school. And there's that balance, right, about we have to be aware of it, but we can't make it normal. Because I want my daughter to advocate. I want her to step up and say, in the global thing, I'm going to make a difference. Mm-hmm. But I also want to be able, for her to be able to confidently walk into a classroom, without being scared of walking into a classroom.
So that kind of leads into, you hear about this stuff every week. In particular, there was a thing going on in Wisconsin in Sheboygan where there was a social media threat that a 15-year-old had made against the school. They arrested this kid as a 15-year-old kid. The next day, a 16-year-old kid was also arrested, same high school, similar threats. It's unclear. They didn't release too much information about whether these two knew each other, it was the same thing, if there was whatever. But, I was a troublemaker as a high school kid. This stuff was not even, this wasn't even on the horizon when I was in high school 30 years ago. I wonder how you think about, obviously you have to respond to things like this, yet you can't react to every single thing with the same intensity and that kind of thing. You'll wear out, and plus you're also missing forest for trees and things like that. So what's your opinion about that? Yeah,
there are levels of response to that. Number one is there has to be a level of response, and the first rung is do something. Mm-hmm. And most modern school districts, law enforcement agencies will have some sort of a partnership that if they become aware of a threat, they'll immediately let law enforcement know. And most modern police departments have a response team to that. Now, I'm speaking about urban, Southern California. Sure. I can't speak to, rural areas that might not have the same resources. However, and that response generally is a paper response to start out a little bit first. Who is the kid? who else lives in the house? Are there access to guns? They'll do a little bit of workup first before they go out
I
there.
suppose, does the teacher or teachers know this child if this is a problem child or borderline or something
Generally
like that?
speaking, in cooperation and within the parameters of what's acceptable or not, the school will have a historical background of what type of student we're talking about that they can share with that first responder that's actually going to speak to the kid and their parents. There's a little, I've had some experience too on the other side is what'll happen is because social media is wildfire. And it'll be everyone everywhere will know what's going on. And again, it might not be the most popular opinion in the room, but we have to advocate for the child that actually put it on social media as well. Because there might just be they had no access to do anything that they said that they were going to do. They said something really was a bonehead thing that maybe before the years before social media, I don't know that I could count the number of bonehead things I might have said, but now it's out there and now there's this stigma. The police department and the school district feel real responsible to blast out information, and we kind of compromise the kid that put it out there. What I'd like, if we're going to respond to these, and we know that we are, we should have something in the can, basically, that says this is what happened. There's no threat to anybody. Take it to a different DEFCON level. But we don't, I've seen police departments say, we got out there and handled it. And, we took the kid was immediately taken into custody. Yeah. And they weren't really taken into custody. They went to a doctor's office.
Sure.
And that the semantics of it, though, goes out there and it stays then with that kid for a very, very long time.
That's a good point.
However, that said, the response has to be something. And the higher the paperwork responses, there are guns in the house. There is a history of threats. As I'm walking into it as the law enforcement investigator, because we're going to take this away from the school district, and law enforcement is going to respond to this. And we should have those resources available to, number one, make sure everybody's safe, and then number two, put something in place for a plan of action that we give good information out to the rest of the folks, but also we're looking out for this kid, and overwhelmingly we're looking out for the safety of everybody involved in the school. That's not rocket science. That's we get the information, we respond to it. But we can respond probably more efficiently sometimes than we are now.
Okay. You want to get going?
Yeah. I mean, I've got one other thing that I'd like to bring up with a similar situation where they told kids not to bring, it was a similar threat, and they told kids not to bring their backpacks to school for the next 2 days. I remember back in late 80s, early 90s that sort of some inner city schools were getting the metal detectors and things like that and armed guards. And it was sort of exotic. It was like these must be really, really bad school districts. But this is sort of almost like a logical endpoint when you're telling people not to bring backpacks. And so eventually their backpacks have to be brought back in. Other places are making sure that you do clear backpacks only. That kind of detection level, it's a little scary, but it seems like what other choice do you have?
Well, there's been a progression to this too. I can take it. Let's go back just after Columbine. I remember we were doing some work with Burbank Unified, and we suggested that educators now start to wear ID tags that are visible, so responding officers can kind of quickly delete. And the educators hated that idea. And now it's tough to, it's a transition from what we were doing to what we're doing now. You're both kids.
Why did they hate that idea?
They never had to do it in the past, and also a lot of them thought it made them a target. That although if I would have answered if you're an adult on campus one way or another, but our thought was that, at least in law enforcement's thought was, we want to be able to see the good people from the bad people as quickly as we possibly can.
Because you remember that in those images in Columbine, all those kids were walking out with their hands over their heads because they didn't know if the gunman might have been
who's the good kid, who's the bad kid. But as then probably about 10 years ago, we started removing lockers. From secondary schools. So most secondary schools now, there's not a locker for somebody, that it's only the backpack.
Which means you have to carry a backpack.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and that was
because kids, somebody might hide an incendiary device or something like that in it?
Back in those days, it was drugs. They were worried that they would put contraband.
I was not aware.
You never saw Breakfast Club?
I was going to say the exact same thing right there.
Yeah.
So, and now we're at the point where if you go to a football game, a stadium, an arena, frequently they have the backpacks.
You got to do the
and
clear
there's
backpacks.
always going to be this balance. And then it comes down to like the local jurisdiction of saying, I want to have some say in my school if I think backpacks are a good idea, a bad idea. But again, I just want to hear the research. What is it that you've done to lead me, to support or not support the fact that we're going to have clear backpacks? And, what does a student really need to bring on campus to effectively get the job done that they need to have?
Yeah, but then it's like, you have clear backpacks, and then some of them are saying, can they have bulletproof backpacks? And then you have some who say, well, clear backpacks, but say if you're growing up in Chicago and it's in the winter and you have a big heavy coat, which you could certainly hide stuff underneath. So.
And ceramic homemade guns and things, don't even get started on that kind of stuff.
You can absolutely go down the rabbit hole on all this. But when, again, it's the reaction that we say, okay, we just had this event. Everybody's on edge. And I think in reading that article, I think what the idea was, we just want to let everybody relax for a second. And maybe it'll take a little bit of the angst away if we say, just bring those books that you need to bring to school and let's leave the backpacks at home.
Right.
And whether, again, and that was a decision that was made at a certain level. You'd like to think that it was illogical. It wasn't a knee-jerk decision. But what I like about it, I'm not 100% sure that I support it, but I like that at least there was a thoughtful thing that came out that says this is what we're going to do and why we're going to do it. Just give me a little bit of information. I feel better about it.
Passion in the heat of the moment and the aftermath versus rational, logical choices don't often intersect, at least for a little while afterwards.
You bet.
It takes some doing, and it's obviously ongoing. So speaking of moving on from that to, we were talking about PTSD, and you're leading seminars and doing action on that. We've got a story about a story that's kind of getting some heat.
It's gotten a lot of heat, and you see this a lot on the internet. The idea of public shaming, and this is a classic example of if you listen to the entire story and you listen to the entire tape, it's not as cut and dry as what the headlines are. And I think some of the headlines were definitely a little bit irresponsible. But here's the story. A Fort Smith, Arkansas woman died Saturday, August 24th. Deborah Stevens, 47 years old, was delivering newspapers in her SUV at about 4:30 in the morning. She had driven into an area that was flash flooding and became stuck. So first she called a family member, and then at 4:38 a.m. she called 911. First responders were dispatched at 4:40. They arrived on the scene at 4:53, so pretty quickly. But due to the rising floodwater, it was another hour before they could reach her in her vehicle. And the floodwater floated the car into a creek nearby. And they tried to rescue her in multiple ways, and she eventually died in the car as it was filling up with water. After 80 minutes after she called, rescuers reached her. They performed CPR, but she had passed. Now, the 911 dispatcher is facing a lot of more than criticism. I think she's facing, taunts for her death, as you've seen online, for how she handled the call. And Fort Smith police released transcripts of the call and also released the actual call itself. Yeah. The 22-minute call, as water rose from her neck, Deborah Stevens, at first she's calm, but then she's freaking out as anybody would. She's yelling, "Somebody save me." And this woman, Donna Renault, the dispatcher, responded with, at first she was calm, but she was, she didn't say what she was supposed to do. That's the biggest part. But then she also said a lot of stuff like, "I don't know why you're freaking out. You freaking out is doing nothing but losing your oxygen, so calm down."
Which, can you imagine? I mean, this woman couldn't swim.
Yeah.
The water's starting at the floorboards at her feet, and it's rising, and nobody ever likes to be told, "Hey, relax," or "calm down," or whatever, particularly when you're having an emergency situation like that. Plus, you can't swim. But what is she supposed to say? The dispatcher, the job is to calm down. But
the job is to
want to be
calm
somewhat
down.
diplomatic on this.
And you like to think if you're giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, maybe she's trying to do a little tough love. She's trying to listen, just shush.
Keep it together.
We're going to keep it together. But it gets worse. And Renault at one point tells her to shut up, and another time says, "Well, this will teach you," talking about why you drove into the water. "I don't see how you didn't see it. You had to drive right over it." And when it's 4:30 in the morning, you're out delivering papers, and if you can go in a couple feet of water, and then a flash flood can get you, and then they take you out there. Stephen screamed for 20 seconds straight, and Renaud tells the other dispatcher she is legit freaking out. Stephen told Renaud that she couldn't swim, and the dispatcher didn't give her the instructions. Now, rescuers usually recommend that you open the window or a sunroof and get onto the vehicle roof, because if you're staying in that car, you're in a tomb right there.
Right. Eric, is there a liability thing there, department? I mean, this is sort of FEMA and other guidelines, familiar with this stuff all the time. But if a dispatcher tells you to do something like that, is that sort of a CYA cover your butt type of thing?
We count on the dispatchers in lieu of actual first responders giving directions. We count on
You'd want that.
Public safety dispatchers.
Yeah.
They do things like walk people through CPR.
Sure.
Yeah.
And they're trained to do that, and they're expected to. Generally, on something, I think there's probably some different angles of the story that we're certainly not reading in the mainstream media. Because you would imagine at one point, because there are first responders that are there that have some radio communication with what's going on, out there, and so the not being at all familiar with this communication center, but at one point she or someone else can hear what the first responders are doing and what the activity is. Generally speaking, that would be coordinated with the dispatcher.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, though, because you don't hear, at least I've listened to what has been made available, and you don't hear at any point where she's saying, okay, this is what the fire department is now doing to try to get to you, or here's what I want you to do, just to keep them engaged, whether or not, it's going to be successful or not. Okay, this is what they're doing now. Can you see them?
Yeah.
That would be kind of what you would think that would
Yeah.
happen.
At one point, I think she says, "Can you honk the horn? Can
Right.
you turn
Right.
the
There you go.
lights, things like that."
Right.
But it wasn't happening, and she doesn't give her instructions. They recommend opening the window, like we talked about. The rescuers couldn't immediately find her. She didn't know exactly where she was, and the car had been moving in the water. Remember, it's 4:30 in the morning. She couldn't honk her horn. Everything in the car was dead, and the dispatcher, Donna Renaud, had actually submitted her resignation form for the department earlier in August, and this incident occurred during her final shift. She worked at the Fort Smith Police Communications Center since 2013 and had actually trained new hires. The interim police chief says Renaud would be disciplined if she was still working for the department, but doesn't think it would be fireable if she was still on staff, nor would it require a criminal investigation.
And it does sound like it was a busy morning. They say that 9 officers were out on patrol. There were 4 dispatchers taking calls, but it sounds like with flash flooding, you're right next to a river. There's a lot of chaos going on, so that may have been something going on there. Can you tell me, when a dispatcher is talking, are they handling multiple? If there's a flooding situation, a bigger emergency response than just a car accident or somebody needs CPR. Are they handling multiple phone calls?
I don't know there's a way that I could adequately describe for you how hectic a modern communication center is, and the stress and the work
Life and
that
death.
the folks do. And that leads back to the whole PTSD thing that we're doing for dispatchers, is the fact that we recognize the fact that the first officers, firefighters, that are out there on the line and doing what they're doing, the unfortunate reality is more police officers and firefighters killed themselves last year than were killed in the line of duty.
Wow.
And there's national legislation towards addressing that. There's no doubt in the world that a public safety dispatcher is a first responder, but as far as the federal government's concerned, they're clerical staff. There's no statistics. There's no
Oh, really?
Yeah, the bottom line is the multitasking is just one of those things related to the job. The stress of this job is immense. And there's, at least those first responders that are out there, they get that opportunity to actually engage their big muscle systems and such, where if you're sitting at one of those consoles and this is going on, and all those, all the stress things that are released inside your body, adrenaline and the rest, they have nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And they're doing the best that they can. And I don't know anything about this communication center, but the standard communication center across the country is understaffed, undertrained, frequently underpaid. And, they work a 10-hour shift or a 12-hour shift, frequently being force hired back in, so they're working multiple shifts. There's a lot of different dynamics, not in any way, shape, or form to condone this behavior.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's an important story that needs to be told as well, that without having that backstory, regardless of all the other things that might have been going on, my question would be, is this a predictable outcome, of the rest of it? Not to defend it, but was it predictable because of multiple stressors that might have led up to a moment like this?
Because then you have to wonder, certain things. Should she have followed the protocol that we've seen? We don't know if it's protocol for that area, but of getting out of the, rolling down the window, getting on the roof, how that could have worked. Could the community? I thought you bring up a really good point with the first responders. And talking with the dispatcher and coordinating that effort to just at least say that, help is on the way, what they were doing, what kind of equipment they had in their cars too, and whether that was adequate enough in a place that might have, I don't know about this place at all, if it floods a lot, should they have different kinds of equipment in their cars, rafts or
she was apparently
spotlights.
right next to a creek that overflows, which added to the problem, and the caller couldn't identify where she was. So a lot of that stuff makes sense as far as, the dispatcher's making every effort to send people there to the right place. Also, overhearing and listening to this stuff happens to be a couple of unfortunate turns of phrases, and it was her last day. So obviously this is a media ready, and we're talking about it. It's a media ready story, but it does bring up, as you say, these first responders is this person who's getting this call and is basically listening helplessly to all sorts of awful things over the phone. That's definitely has to, there's probably a reason why this woman is retiring or resigning from this thing.
And there's I read this story that doesn't make national news like this, but I've read this story probably once every 2 months for the last year or so. That there's a 911 dispatcher that didn't do something that they really should have done, or said something that they really should not have said. And it, again, having been around a communication center, during simple times and stressful times, I would say that maybe there's a training component, that especially under, who knows, I don't know if this is like a quiet place that just turned into a disastrously crazy place.
Or if she was working 9 hours and this happened in the 10th hour or something.
Whatever those things might be. But some of this, all I'm offering is that some of this is maybe predictable. Some of the behaviors, some people are just maybe not cut out for the job. There's no doubt about it. And I won't judge this either way. But when I read, this isn't the first time I've read this story, and it will not be the last. And I go back to some experience that says there may be a little bit of things that we can do to prevent items like articles like this appearing.
And then you have to think now that this woman, I follow a lot of people on social media. A lot of people send me things and tag me in things on Facebook, and was running her picture with the stuff and saying, there was a thread out there saying we need to shame this woman, we need to publicly shame her, she's a piece of garbage, et cetera, et cetera. And it reminded me of John Ronson wrote a really good book called So You've Been Publicly Shamed, where nowhere near something along these lines, because this was a life and death situation, but he talks to the woman who made that, it was not a very good joke, but she made that joke, I'm going to Africa at the AIDS. Do you remember that? And then she was on the plane, and then she got fired when she got off the plane, and how that affects people. You talk about PTSD for not, obviously the standards are so much higher for somebody that has lives on the line, more than, you can screw up in regular jobs. Not as ones as high pressure, and there's no lives that are going to be taken. With something like this, though, how does this affect the entire dispatch community? Yeah,
it's there's a very wide paintbrush related to any profession, especially like a profession with consequence. That if I don't do my job constitutionally, as a police officer, there's tremendous consequence to that. A firefighter and the same with this. There's tremendous consequence, and now everyone gets painted with a brush. And unfortunately, what we tend to do is we say, outwardly, we say, oh, you know what, we're more professional than that. That would never happen here. But behind the scenes, where you can't see, we're going better them than us, because we know the same things that are going on at one place are actually happening in ours. It could happen anywhere.
Well, we should say that the Fort Smith Police Department has in my mind, done exactly what they need to be doing. They've been completely open about this. They released the transcript. They released a time chart of what happened, who did what, when. They've been, as I said, they released the entire recording. They're being publicly transparent. They're going to take a lot of heat no matter what way you do it. But obviously the best thing to do is to be as transparent as possible as soon as possible.
Every single time. There are some extreme nuanced cases where there are some confidentiality issues, or you hear the standard, there's an ongoing investigation.
Right.
But sometimes those are, pardon the pun, but cop-outs, and other times it's accurate. But I couldn't agree more. Been down these paths a couple of times. The more information we share, the faster we share it, and the quicker we are to accept responsibility for our actions. We move on to the next day.
Life lesson.
So now we have a interesting story, and one of a system actually working correctly out of Georgia. A former police recruit in Georgia was arrested accused of raping 8 women since 2015, and here's how they caught him. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution reports that Kenneth Thomas Bowen III was arrested and charged with rape on August 27th. Bowen was connected. He was 24 years old, and he was allegedly connected to the cases from the DNA at the crime scenes. But investigators said that the background info he provided in his personnel file, specifically tattoos on his arms and the description of his car, led them to him. The Journal-Constitution reports attacks all happened within a 2-mile radius of Bowen's residence. Bowen had previously been a police recruit and had worked for the Clayton County Police Department in Georgia. He was never a certified officer, police said. Fox Carolina reports that Bowen had been hired as a recruit in September of last year. He had been terminated before he finished academy training, about 3 months after he was hired. Police chief says that he was extremely late, 4 hours, and had lied about the reason, and that's the reason why he was fired. Clayton County encompasses the southern part of the Atlanta metro area. The sexual assaults occurred between 2015 and March of this year. In the March case, Bowen is accused of breaking into the woman's house and attacking her at knife point, and he allegedly fled on foot when the woman's boyfriend came home. And Clayton County Police Chief Kevin Roberts said, quote, "Had he not attempted to join the ranks of the Clayton County Police Department, it's questionable whether we would have apprehended him." Now, I question that, though, because if they had DNA from the crime scenes, they probably could have run some familial DNA and eventually found him. But
although it's unclear, I mean, obviously it's got to be different department to department across the country, but are you giving DNA samples or are you just being fingerprinted when you're doing your background stuff when you're applying to be a police recruit or a deputy?
I'm not aware of any place that's actually requiring you to submit a DNA sample, although I don't think we're probably that far away from that.
Yeah,
right.
We should be, if anything, just to narrow it out.
That's
especially
right. That was the first thing that I thought of, and then I thought, well, wait, they probably don't do that. They probably just
and it could be happening. I'm just not aware of the fact that that is happening, and that your background investigation, a standard background investigation, is fingerprints. And, for law enforcement, again, there's consequence to it. So we like to think that we're doing the best we can. There's a paper background about financials and other things we have you submit. And then we go out and knock on doors and talk to folks to try to get a little bit of an idea who you are and what you mean to your community. But
why wouldn't you do a DNA test? If anything, just to eliminate you if you left DNA at the scene.
Because,
well, money, it might be
you got to pay for labs or something like that.
Yeah, but pre-hire, there actually wouldn't be a union because you're not in the union yet. Yeah. But I bet you there's a money thing to it because, you've read the cases where there's DNA samples that are sitting from rape cases sitting on, shelves somewhere because they don't have the money to process them. I wouldn't want to be the police department that says we're processing these, but we're not processing criminal DNA.
Yeah. What's the most recent? Is LA County caught up now?
There's when we say caught up, they've caught up in terms of they processed them. But my question always is that, all right, well, you processed them. What have you done with them now?
Still need to.
Have you put them all into CODIS? Have you put them all into whatever state database that you have? Have you even gone so far as start working with genealogists to do familial DNA, at least starting with your serial cases? And they haven't, and they won't even answer those questions. So whenever somebody says, yes, to end the backlog, and they say, oh, we're all done, we have no more backlog. All right, headline. That's just the first step. Yeah. The next step is, all right, what are you going to do with that? And let's hear that. Let's hear what you did with that.
I'm a little bit biased because I come from a small agency with resources and expectations. So if we had DNA, we tested it. But keep in mind, that Burbank cases that would involve DNA would be relatively a small section of cases. But a larger place that's dealing with hundreds and hundreds of cases, every few months, not to make excuses for it, but just the person power that's necessary to be able to. The first part got caught. This stuff shouldn't be sitting on a shelf someplace.
Yeah.
The second part, now we start getting into just priorities and deployments and saying, all right, the two of you are a team. Here's what we're going to do with that. That's on your desk now. So a stack of cases on your desk that was this big just got 3 times as big. But that's what we sign up for. It's you work the cases the best you can with the information you have. They went from one shelf to another shelf.
Yeah, it's exactly right.
Saying that's not okay.
Yeah. So, Judge, back to this case. The judge denied Bowen bond last week for 7 counts of rape and 1 count of sexual battery.
My only final thought on this is, why would this man, specifically in this case, why would you join the police force or try to be in law enforcement when you are a violent criminal?
It's not unusual.
Yeah, you see that a lot.
The psychological profile of
if I can get
be a little bit.
I'm a bad person, but if I can get behind that gun and the badge, it's going to get me into places that I can even be worse than I am
and have less accountability.
You bet.
Right.
So, and there's a control factor, and
that's a good point.
Things that go on that is facilitated if I put handcuffs and a badge on you. It plays into the psychological lunacy that's going on with some folks.
So, Owen, we get comments on True Crime Daily, the Facebook page.
I've read a few of those.
YouTube page, yes. And here is a particularly sad story that went viral. Was reacted by 3,700 people. It was shared 2,000 times, and it just happened yesterday. Mother killed in road rage shooting while teaching her son to drive. A driving lesson turned deadly when a Milwaukee mother was shot to death in a road rage incident Friday night in front of her 17-year-old son. Just horrible.
She was giving driving lessons to her son. She's an off-duty corrections officer, as a matter of fact.
And the comments, of which we've gotten about 500, have gone into people talking about guns. Melanie B said, "But I need my gun to protect myself from mothers teaching their kids to drive, even though I hit them. Makes sense. Condolences to his family." And then Max A responded with, "She needed a gun," and then that went on for about 40 comments of people still questioning whether we need more guns or less guns. People were definitely talking about why we don't have empathy. Todd A said, the insurance industry, I'm in the insurance industry. When I'm taking claims, I often ask, why didn't you get the other driver's information? Now I know why. You get out of the car, you start trading information, words get heated. God. Somebody, Beverly R said, why I stay indoors. Kids learn to drive in a parking lot. Just go back to the basics. No, you have to learn how to drive in a street at some point. That's not a solution. That's not a solution. The solution is don't shoot people. So that's the comment that we that's one of the strings, and I'm sure that's going to get bigger and bigger as more and more people talk to that.
You can find that story on our True Crime Daily Facebook page if you'd like to weigh in on that, and it's also, of course, on truecrimedaily.com.
That's right.
Among our many outlets.
So you can check out our content on truecrimedaily.com and on Facebook. As you said, you can subscribe to us on YouTube. And don't forget to download our weekly podcast on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play. Comments or questions about the show, call us up. Leave a message at 888-548-9758. We love hearing from you. And we might run your comment on the air in a future podcast. Until next week, I would like to say, Eric, thank you so much for showing up.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Very insightful, very insightful things. We could talk all day. And this is the True Crime Daily, the podcast, reminding you,
don't do crimes.
See you next week.